Alright, hello all you people out there, this is Michael of 2.5 Studios and welcome back to another Game Maker tutorial. Now, this is going to be deviating a little bit from the little silly platformer that I've been making over the last few weeks, and this is going to be dealing with reading and writing text files. And similarly to the INI files that I talked about in the last one of these videos, these can be used to store data between runs of the program, save data, or any other data really. It's going to be unformatted, so it's not restricted to the key and value setting that INIs are, and you can do a little bit more with it. But on the other hand, they do take a little bit more work to use. Now, I should say this in the beginning, File I/O in GameMaker 8.1 and in Studio is slightly different, and I'm going to be talking about both of those here, but I'm going to be using 8.1 for the most of this video, because it's somewhat simpler and the more raw computer science is done here. There are a few technical changes that you have to make for Studio, but anyhow, we're going to be starting out by declaring two local variables, just so that I have them, the scope of them defined, really just as good practice more than anything else. And I'm going to be saying file equals that function. This function is going to take one parameter and it's going to be a string. This is going to be the name of the file that we're going to use. And we're just going to say file.text. And you don't have to say anything else, but it's good practice to say this working directory plus the file name, because the working directory is the folder that the game is running in, say the location of the executable. It's slightly different in Studio, and once again I'll be talking about that later. In this case it's this, and it just gives the exact location of the file that you want to use, not the relative location. And in the case that you say want to have the file that you're using somewhere else on the computer, this is good to have on hand. Working directory is, so that you have more information about where the file is going to be located. Anyhow, next thing we're going to do is say line equals file text read string. And that's going to take one argument, and that's going to be the file that we just opened. Now this, think about it as an object representing the file that you currently have open and you're going to be reading, I keep getting those mixed up, reading from or writing to, but it's really not, actually it's not F, it's file. I should just change the name to F just to make it less typing for me. All this is going to be an index, because GameMaker is an index-based engine representing the file that's currently open on the computer. You can have up to 32 of them open on your computer at one time, but you generally don't want to have more than one open at a time, just so that you don't have them all loaded into the computer's RAM and wasting resources and things like that. And you could even possibly have them conflict with each other. You could possibly end up reading to and writing from the same file at the same time by accident, and then you'll have some really weird errors that will be hard to trace. But anyway, next thing we're going to do is we're going to be showing the value of line on the screen so that we know it's read. And then we're going to be closing the file. Once again, it's good practice to close your files when you're done using them so that they're not wasting RAM and so that accidents don't happen where you try to, I don't know, open a file twice or something weird like that. Now, this isn't going to do anything at first because I don't actually have a file named file.text in here that has any contents in it, so I'm just going to create one of those real quick. So I'm just going to be saying this is line 1, this is line 2. I'm just going to be saying that, so we're going to have a couple lines of text to read in there to use for this this program. Now let's close that and run the game. And Studio, you can go away now. So this is line 1. Oh, yeah, about that. Alright, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to rename this F instead of file because I'm lazy and I'm probably going to make that error more than once. There we go. Just in case anybody needed confirmation that this works, this is line 1, and then we're done. Alright, so say you want to read another line from the file. Well, we can just copy and paste this, and I don't know what people watching this are expecting to happen, but it's probably not what you think. This is line 1, and this is an empty string. It doesn't say this is line 2 or anything, because remember that's what it should say next in the file. Because I'm going to open this up just so that I can pull it up and check it whenever. I'm going to be moving that away to my other monitor instead of minimizing it. So what's the problem? The problem happens to be that GameMaker reads this, the computer reads that line, and then the cursor is here, and it doesn't progress past that. You can say read line as many, you can say not read line, you can say read string as many times as you want, and the cursor is going to stay here. And for whatever reason, computers don't interpret new line characters, which would be this thing. The enter, when you hit the enter key, that's a new line character. When computers are reading files, they don't interpret that, and then they just stop as if you're at the end. What you have to do, if you want to get to the next line, is say file text read line. And that is going to skip from wherever the computer is on the current file to the beginning of the next line. And that could be either from the end of the file to the next line or the beginning of one file, and skips completely over this and just goes there. If I were to get rid of this and just say read line, the first message that would pop up would be this, because that's where the cursor now is, because it skipped this line. But we're not going to do that. Now we're just going to rather simply run the game. This is line 1, this is line 2. Alright, so that's one problem out of the way. Now, say you want to read all of the lines in a file and you don't know how big it is, you don't know how many lines there are. And even if you do know how many lines there are, say if there are 600 of them, you probably don't want to copy and paste code 600 times, because that's usually a bit of a mess if something goes wrong, and then if nothing else, you're going to have to be scrolling through 600 lines of code. 1200 in this case, because there are, or 1800 rather in this case, because there are 3 lines per read. Anyhow, what we're going to want to do is we're going to use a loop. And even instead of saying loop an exact number of times, say there are 4 lines in this file, so loop 4 times and read a line from the file every time, we're going to be setting up a do while loop, or do until. I always call it do while. I think that's just my Java background rubbing off on me. But you can use just a plain while loop if you want to. I personally prefer do until, just because I happen to like do until loops better than while loops, but it's really up to you. Now, we're going to be saying we're actually going to be getting rid of the line local variable entirely, because we really don't need that. We can just say show message. We can just say this, read the string, and pass that directly into the show message, and it'll work just fine. And the end condition is going to be when this function returns true. Now, file text EOF. EOF stands for end of file. And this is a simple function that's going to return true if you've hit the end of this file. So if the computer's imaginary cursor is here, right after the T in count. And if that happens, there's nothing else to read. This is going to return true. And the loop is going to break, and the file is going to close, and the program is going to be done. If you wanted to, if you did want to assign a value to this, say line equals file text read whatever, you could check if line equals an empty string, because also if you get to the end of a file and you try to read from it, it will just simply return an empty string, which is rather convenient because it doesn't crash on you in case you accidentally try and read past the end of the file. But on the other hand, if you have something like a line break in there, it'll hit this, and it'll think it's at the end because it'll return an empty string, and it won't ever get to that part, which is really not what we want. So we're going to be using EOF and then running the game, if you can call this a game. This is line 1. I forgot to read a line. That's an infinite loop. Task Manager was invented for a reason. Yes, always, 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 every time you read from a file, remember to do that. That's exactly what I was saying before, wasn't I? It'll just keep reading an empty string, and yeah, that'll happen. That's another case where you might get an empty string, and you don't want to, is if you forget to say read line. Anyhow, 1, 2, 4. I can do math, and there we go. So that's pretty simple. That's reading from a file. I am actually going to go and take this and dump it in a script over here, and we're going to just call this read. And we're going to paste that, and we're going to create this little signature here, and it's just going to be read with no arguments. And similarly, we're going to make another function, and we're going to call it write. And that doesn't exist currently, but it will in a minute, because I'm going to create another script, and it's going to be write. Alright, no English language pun intended. But writing through files is very similar to reading from them. So once again, we're going to say var f, and we're going to assign this a value. And instead of saying read, we're going to be saying write. And aside from that, it's pretty similar to the other one. We're going to be passing it a string containing the path of the file that we're going to write to. And in the cases of reading files, I didn't get to show this earlier because the file already existed the first time I ran the program. But if a file doesn't exist, it'll be created as an empty text file, basically. So that's really nice. You don't have to check to see if it exists before reading or writing, and you don't have to worry about weird errors. The first thing we probably want to do is close the file at the end so that we don't have to worry about that later. And writing to a file is, like I said before, similar to reading. you're going to say file text write string, and you're going to pass it the file that you want to deal with and the string you want to write. So we're going to say this is a string because I'm creative. And I'm going to hit F5 and I'm going to run the game. And you didn't get to see it because it was on the other monitor, but this magically appeared. And it says this is a string inside. Perfect. Nothing else happened. Once again, you can say copy and paste this, and you can say this is a second string. By the way, when you just write to a file, if there's any contents inside of it, they're going to get overwritten. So this is going to get overwritten, and it's basically going to be deleted and replaced with these two. And it's not going to look terribly different because in this case, the strings that you're writing are basically the same. But if you were to have something, say, I don't know, something weird like that, and run the program, I'm going to actually comment this out for a minute. You'll see why in a minute if you don't already guess. But we're going to come back over here, and the gibberish has been replaced. So that's that. If you want to add on to the end of a text file in writing, it's pretty simple. Instead of saying write, you'll say append, and that will jump the cursor to the end of the computer. And that will jump the computer's cursor to the end of the text file, and you'll start writing from there, and you'll be saving whatever data is already in there. But that's that. That's just a little warning there to be careful of. Now, we're going to be writing two different strings to a file now, and we have run the program. I accidentally opened Adobe Premiere. I didn't mean to do that. No. I'm going to use it for editing. I'm not going to use it for writing code. But let's see. The lessons folder. Oh, look, it's already open. File W. This is a string, this is a string. There's no new line in between them. As with reading from files, GameMaker and computer programs in general don't automatically put new lines at the end of strings when you write them to files. You have to do that manually, and I can delete that. It doesn't really matter because, like I said before, it'll get overwritten. Let's see. Oh, I can't open up the GM window until the program's closed. As with writing to files, reading, I told you I always get those confused. You're going to have to manually write a new line. And to do that, not too unlike file text read line, you're going to say file text write line. This is going to insert a new line character after the end of the line that you've written. So we can save that, hit F5 to run the game, look back in file W, and now indeed you have a line in between the first and the second thing that you've written. All right, so that's the main bulk of file I/O. There are a couple other things you can do. If you were to generate some of this code to help, if you were to look in the manual, hit F1 and look in the manual. So there are a couple other functions that you can use. EOLN, end of line, basically checks to see if you're at the end of the line already or not. But that's not terribly useful because if you're ever in doubt, you can just read from the file to, say, a temporary variable or something and check to see if it's an empty string. And if it's an empty string, it's basically at the end of the line or at the end of the file, but no matter. You have a couple different options for reading reals and reading strings, writing reals and writing strings, but I don't really like read and write real that much because if you want to just write a real number, you can just cast it to a string, and it'll work for all possible values that you might want to write to the file. And in the case of reading real numbers from strings, say if you have a bad file, if a user messed with it, or if the last program that wrote to it didn't do it properly or something like that, and you end up getting a value that isn't a number, that could cause some problems. And it's much easier, at least I think, to read a string and then interpret it to make sure that the things it contain can be casted back into a real number. And that will save some headaches. But that's about it for basic file I/O in GameMaker. So, I did say I'd be getting over to Studio, and I'm going to close out of that. I'm going to move Task Manager over here, and I hope it doesn't crash again. The program, not Task Manager, although if Task Manager crashes, that would also be a bit of a problem, because I had that happening earlier today, and that wasn't fun. But we're going to be really quickly importing the project that I was just working on. Let's go into this. Let's import that. Save it just to have it well saved. And we're going to do a couple things. So let's see. Firstly, we're going to change this to read. And we can get out of there. So we're going to be reading from a file first instead of writing, just like we did earlier. And we're going to hit F5 and run the game. And this is different from Studio. You're going to get an error. Studio doesn't handle external files the same way 8.1 and previous versions did. So the error, this is This is a studio error. It may be a bit weird to read, they did make them more complicated from previous versions of GameMaker. I'll probably end up making a video on these kinds of errors sooner or later, because a lot of people do seem to be having problems with them, understanding them and such. But anyway, it tells us where the error happened, and it tells us the exact line that the error happened. And in this case, file text read string file is not open for reading. Is that so? And this is not closing like I told it to, excuse me. I like it when the program crashes so badly that the red X stops responding. Anyway, we're going to go into read, and well, on the surface it doesn't look like there's anything wrong. You have it open for reading. You're reading the data from it before you close it. So that should be all good. The problem is over here in the included files folder. So this is something new to Studio. You're going to want to right click and hit create new included file. And the file that we're going to be using is going to be this one. And we're going to save that. And if we were to run the game again, it'll all be fine. So come on, run the game. And indeed, it does say this is line 1, line 2 for Dragonite can count. And this included files thing, if you were to double click on it, this is a text file. You can just open it up in Notepad or whatever other program it is. I believe if you wanted to, say, include a PNG or something, and you would double click on it in the included files window, you'd open it in like picture view or whatever the default is. Not completely certain when it comes to that. It does have a set of properties that you can look at, but it's not all that exciting. Anyway, next we're going to be writing, and I should probably change the function from read to write. That orange text is really hard to see. I should change the color one of these days so I can see it a little bit better. Alright, script's going to be a nice dark brown. That should be a little bit easier to see. Let's see. Yeah, it looks a lot better. Anyway, I'm also going to go and change this to just the file that we were reading earlier, so that I don't need to go and make another included file because I don't feel like doing that. And here I'm just going to be saying write 1 and 2 for simplicity purposes. Really not even, but yeah, we'll also create a new space every time we write to the end of the file. Anyhow, so let's run the game now, and that's all going to happen. And it didn't crash, which is good. But now the problem comes up, where did it go? If you were to look in, say, this folder, where the GMX folder is stored, if you were to go into here, nothing has gotten written to file, even though it really should have been. If you were to go into the GMX folder itself, where the project is stored, there's nothing in here. Data files, maybe, you would think. This is the included file, but even that hasn't been edited. Well, if you know the answer to that already, wonderful. And if not, I'm going to hold off on answering it a little while longer. I'm going to go and switch this back to read. And just in case we're not completely convinced that the file hasn't been written to earlier, there's a mosquito buzzing around my room. I think I got it at the time, but now it's on my finger, which I do not approve of either. We're going to run the game and see if we see the data that we wrote to it last time appends it to the end. Or replacing it, rather, anyway. Yeah, it replaced it because I didn't say append. Okay, so it's an empty string, 1, 2, and that's it. Alright, so where did it go? It's obviously worked, but we don't know where it is. And this may not be terribly important to some people if you're not too interested in the inner workings of GameMaker, if you just want to like do the higher level programming. But as it turns out, GameMaker makes use of the app.dal local folder. And this is basically where a lot of computer programs, you may see a lot of other GameMaker projects that I've worked on in Studio. This is where a lot of temporary information is stored. Save data, in the case of a perspective. I want to say Minecraft uses it as well, but no, it's in the roaming, not the local. This folder, in case you're wondering, is stored in the computer user's user folder app data, which is a hidden folder, so you're going to want to go into control panel and make hidden folders visible if you want to be able to mess around with this. And then local, and then it's going to take the name of whatever the name of the project you're working on happens to be. And over here it's file.io. You have file.txt, and this data file, which is empty. That's the default that's created in every GameMaker Studio project. Open file.txt, and here you have it. An empty line, 1 and 2. Okay, so you definitely have to be more careful with reading and writing files in GameMaker Studio than you do in 8.1. And that could be a good thing or a bad thing depending on what you want to do with them. If you want to handle large volumes of files, like a certain Pokemon game of mine does, having GameMaker deal with them all could be a bit of a pain. But if you're just going to use one or two for, say, I don't know, a save data or something like that, it's not so bad. There is one more type of file I/O that GameMaker supports, and as far as I know, it's basically the lowest level of file I/O that computer programming languages generally get to, and that's binary files. That's the bits and the bytes and the ASCII character codes that computers use when they communicate within themselves. And that is going to be the most advanced part of file I/O. I am going to make a video on that. I just dropped something on the floor. I am going to make a video on that, and I am planning to upload it on the same weekend as this video, perhaps a half hour later or something, like I usually do, putting up 2 GameMaker videos a weekend. But before anyone does go and watch that, I will be asking that you have at least a basic understanding of how binary and ASCII character codes and things like that work. I will probably be explaining it as much that you need in that video, but it will make things substantially easier if everyone watching that does at least have some background in that. But for now, I do hope you all enjoyed that. Rate, comment, and subscribe. Please and thank you. Watch some of the stuff I have uploaded, and I will see you all later. I need some water.